dreams of Redemption Gulch. The familiar aroma of cinnamon and proofing yeast, usually a balm to Clara Sweetwater, wrestled with the butterflies in her belly. She attacked the apple turnover dough, her forceful needing a silent vent for the anxieties churning within. Sunlight spilled through the window, igniting a flurry of dust motes and highlighting the frayed edges of her favorite floral apron. Her gaze drifted to the stack of letters resting beside the flowered workspace, Hank Buchanan's letters. Softened from countless readings, each syllable whispered of possibility. Redemption Gulch, she breathed, the name a foreign melody on her tongue. It conjured vistas of sweeping landscapes, undulating hills, a world liberated from Dust Creek's monotonous grip. Here, the days were a predictable cycle, pre-dawn rising, baking until shadows lengthened, the endless sweeping of flowered dust, and the drone of stale gossip. Hank's missives offered a counterpoint. Cattle drives beneath a canopy of stars, a home ringing with the joyous noise of children he yearned to share with her. He sketched a picture of his ranch, a sturdy house boasting a porch swing and a view that swallowed the horizon. He sought a partner. He confessed, someone to weave her life with his and nurture a family. Clara recognized the gamble, a blind leap into the uncertain. Some town gossips deemed her daft, discarding a perfectly good life as if she possessed one for a man she'd never laid eyes on. But desperation, she knew, was a potent current. And beneath the trepidation, a tiny flame of anticipation flickered. At 28, Dust Creek was slowly leaching the life from her. She reached for the most recent letter. The ink blurred where her fingers had gripped it tight during a particularly bleak evening. The wildflowers are riotous this year, Clara. I envision you strolling amongst them, sunlight dancing in your hair. A blush bloomed on her cheeks. Hank's prose was captivating. No one had ever remarked on sunlight dancing in her hair. Here, she was simply Clara, the baker. Plain Clara. Perhaps Redemption Gulch held the key to unlocking something more. With renewed resolve, she finished the dough. The turnovers, burnished gold and shimmering with sugar, were arrayed on the counter to cool, a small offering for Mrs. Gable, her neighbor and ever-watchful guardian. Upstairs, she wrestled open her trunk, its hinges emitting a rusty shriek. Inside, layers of time-worn quilts guarded her modest treasures. A handful of dresses, mostly cast-offs, a well-thumbed Bible, and a petite silver locket cradling her parents' image. Each dress was carefully folded, smoothing out the creases as if preparing for a gala instead of a journey into the unknown. She added her finest bonnet, adorned with silk ribbons, carefully kept for a momentous occasion. This, she reasoned, qualified. The locket felt cool in her hand. Her parents would have wanted her to thrive. They wouldn't want her to stagnate in Dust Creek, eternally baking apple turnovers. A crescendo of hope and anxiety swelled within her. She packed a slender volume of poetry, a secret indulgence hidden from the judgmental eyes of the town busybodies. And nestled in a corner, a pouch of her prized sourdough starter, swaddled in damp linen. Even in Redemption Gulch, people deserved quality bread. A gentle rapping echoed from downstairs. "Clara, dear, are you presentable?" It was Mrs. Gable, her voice a comforting rasp. Clara smoothed her apron and opened the door. The older woman stood on the porch, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by a life fully experienced. She cradled a small, hand-stitched quilt, its colors faded but the stitching meticulous. "Heard you were setting off, dear," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes reflecting a poignant mix of sadness and understanding. "Thought you might need this. Wards off the chill on those long nights." Clara's throat constricted. "Oh, Mrs. Gable, you shouldn't have." "Nonsense. It's been gathering dust in the attic. Besides," she added with a playful glint, "I expect a photograph of you with that handsome rancher, once you've settled in." Clara mustered a watery smile. "I will, and thank you for everything." They stood in contemplative silence, unspoken sentiments hanging in the air. Dust Creek had little fondness for overt displays of emotion. "Be brave, Clara," Mrs. Gable said at last, squeezing her hand. and don't let anyone define what you're capable of. Clara watched Mrs. Gable retreat towards her house, the quilt held close. Then, she turned back to the bakery, her heart a frantic drum. She turned the lock, the click reverberating in the quiet space. A final, lingering look at the worn surfaces, the flowered floorboards, the familiar embrace of her small bakery. This was the fulcrum, the close of one chapter, the opening of the next. She lifted her suitcase, its heft surprisingly manageable. It bore her aspirations, her reveries, and a small sack of sourdough starter. It held the promise of Redemption Gulch. Drawing a fortifying breath, Clara Sweetwater emerged onto the dusty thoroughfare, poised to confront whatever fate had in store. The stagecoach was scheduled for arrival at dawn, a train ride and a broken promise. The rhythmic clatter of the train against the iron rails was Clara's soporific, a percussive backdrop to the daydreams burgeoning in her mind. Each lurch and mournful cry of the engine pulled her further from Dust Creek's monotonous routine, whisking her toward the sprawling promise of Redemption Gulch. She envisioned Hank, his sun-etched features softening into a welcoming smile, awaiting her arrival. Not a lavish estate, but a solid, welcoming ranch house arose in her thoughts, smelling of seasoned timber and bubbling stew. Children, perhaps not instantly, filled the imagined rooms with joyous clamor. The other passengers were an anonymous collection of faces, a blend of world-weary commuters and dewy-eyed hopefuls, yet Clara remained oblivious. Her vision was consumed by the panorama outside. Undulating hills, brushed with shades of amber and sienna, populated by grazing cattle that blurred into the horizon. This was it, the life she had dared to conjure. As the train decelerated, anticipation coiled tight in Clara's stomach. Redemption Gulch presented itself as a smattering of structures against a majestic wall of snow-dusted peaks. The air, bracing and pure, carried the fragrance of evergreens and moist earth, a far cry from the stale, all too familiar scents of Dust Creek. With a final shudder, the train sighed to a stop, its brakes expelling steam in a serpent-like hiss. Smoothing the creases from her plain calico dress, Clara inhaled deeply, willing her racing heart to calm. This was the moment she'd waited for. Stepping onto the weathered planks of the platform, she scanned the small gathering. Her gaze darted, searching for a beloved face, the kind crinkle of familiar eyes, the determined jawline she had come to adore through letters. But Hank was nowhere in sight. A farmer, his mouth full of chewing tobacco, observed her with unconcealed curiosity. A young mother, her toddler clinging to her, whispered behind a raised hand to her companion, her gaze lingering on Clara. Two cowboys lounged against a post, their easy laughter abruptly cut short as she passed. None of them were him. Redemption Gulch. Last stop for some, the conductor boomed. Clara stood frozen as the other passengers began to descend. A traveling salesman, shiny briefcase in hand, a family overflowing with children, a pair of nuns offering tranquil smiles. Each stepped on the platform and into the arms of waiting loved ones or acquaintances. Every embrace felt like a tiny prick, a sharp reminder of her own isolation. The platform began to empty. The station master, a stout figure adorned with a generous walrus mustache, adjusted his spectacles, observing her with a mix of impatience and concern. "Expecting someone, miss?" he inquired, his tone rough around the edges but not unkind. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice barely audible. "Hank Buchanan." The station master frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. "Buchanan, you say? Haven't seen him around today. He's usually here to meet the afternoon train." He scratched at his chin, his gaze drifting towards the deserted main street. "Maybe he's been held up. It happens." Clara forced a smile, attempting to conceal the growing dread constricting her chest. "Perhaps," she offered, the words sounding hollow even to her. She watched the last of the travelers collect their belongings and vanish into the town. The train's whistle echoed, a mournful sound that reverberated through the valley. With a final expulsion of steam, The behemoth lurched forward, pulling away from the station, leaving Clara alone on the platform, dust devils dancing around her ankles. The sun blazed down, and the air, once invigorating, now felt stifling and heavy. She sank onto a nearby bench, the coarse wood abrasive against her skin. Her carpetbag felt like a lead weight in her lap, containing her meager treasures, her mother's shawl, a well-worn Bible, several treasured photographs. Where was he? Had something befallen him? Had his feelings changed? Doubts, like insidious tendrils, began to creep into her mind, choking the delicate hope she had so diligently nurtured. She watched the shadows lengthen, stretching across the platform like grasping claws. The station master disappeared into his office, the click of the latch a definitive, echoing sound of solitude. The promise of a new life, the dream of love and belonging, seemed to dissipate with the dying light, leaving her stranded in a remote town, an unclaimed mail-order bride. Left at the altar, the last flicker of sunset had bled from the sky hours ago, leaving Clara shivering under the thin shawl she'd packed for a warmer climate. The wooden bench, splintered and rough against her borrowed dress, offered little comfort. The Redemption Gulch train station, once bustling with the arrival, was now a cavernous emptiness echoing with the mournful whistle of departing locomotives, trains heading anywhere but where she needed to be. She tried to busy herself, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt, rebraiding her hair, meticulously rearranging the contents of her carpet bag, anything to avoid the stares. But the townsfolk, a motley collection of weathered faces and curious eyes, were a relentless audience. Their whispers, like a swarm of persistent insects, buzzed around her. Poor thing. A woman's voice, raspy with age, carried on the night air. Mail-order bride, I reckon. Buchanan must have changed his mind. A man's deeper tone followed, laced with amusement. Clara's cheeks burned. Each word was a tiny pinprick, deflating the hopes that had buoyed her all the way from Dust Creek. She hugged her bag tighter, wishing she could disappear into its worn fabric. Across the street, the warm glow of the general store spilled onto the dusty thoroughfare. Inside, Martha Higgins, a woman whose ample frame seemed as solid as the mercantile itself, leaned against the counter, her voice a booming presence even through the open doorway. Can you imagine? Leaving your whole life behind, just to be jilted at the station. Some men are just plain scoundrels. Martha punctuated her pronouncements with vigorous nods, her multiple chins wobbling like jelly. Buchanan always was a bit of a wild one, agreed Silas, the store owner, polishing a well-worn apple on his sleeve. Never could settle down. Heard he was seen heading towards Copper Creek yesterday. Martha's eyes narrowed. Copper Creek? That's where Delilah May runs that establishment. Well, I never. Poor girl. Clara couldn't hear the specifics, but she caught enough to understand she was the subject of their speculation, their pity, and their thinly veiled scorn. It was like being on a stage, forced to play a humiliating role in a drama she hadn't written. The station master, a lanky man with a perpetually worried expression, shuffled towards her. Miss Sweetwater, was it? I'm closing up for the night. Are you expecting someone? Clara swallowed, her throat tight with unshed tears. Yes, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Buchanan. Hank Buchanan. The station master's gaze softened, a flicker of sympathy replacing the worry. He hasn't been around. Look, there's a room above the saloon. Not the fanciest place, but it's shelter. Tell Maggie I sent you. She'll give you a fair price. He hesitated. Don't wait up, Miss Sweetwater. Some folks ain't worth the wait. He turned and disappeared into the station, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness. Clara was alone again. The weight of her situation crashed down on her. Hank wasn't coming. The whispers were right. She was abandoned, left at the altar in a town that didn't want her with nowhere to go. Tears finally escaped, tracing hot paths down her cold cheeks. They mingled with the dust on her face, leaving streaks of mud in their wake. She huddled on the bench, the setting moon casting long, skeletal shadows around her. From across the street, Martha Higgins watched. She watched the young woman's slumped shoulders, the silent tears, the utter desolation etched on her face. The apple Silas had offered remained untouched on the counter. A frown creased her brow. The woman looked like a discarded doll, broken and forgotten. Martha sighed. Maybe Buchanan was a scoundrel, but that didn't mean this girl deserved to be left to the wolves. She grabbed her shawl from the coat rack by the door. "Silas, I'll be back in a bit. Gotta check on something." She didn't wait for a response, her heavy footsteps echoing on the wooden floor as she headed out into the night. Clara didn't notice Martha approaching until she was standing directly in front of her. She quickly brushed away the tears, ashamed to be seen in such a state. "You Clara Sweetwater?" Martha's voice was gruff, but there was a hint of something else beneath the surface. Clara nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "Come on, girl," Martha said, extending a hand. "You're coming with me. It's too cold out here to be alone, and I'll fix you some of the best beef stew you ever tasted." A kind stranger. The sun beat down on Clara, amplifying the humiliation that burned in her cheeks. Each grain of dust kicked up by a passing wagon seemed to mock her, swirling around her like a visible manifestation of her ruined dreams. She sat on the edge of the wooden platform, the worn leather of her valise digging into her palm. The pitying glances from the townsfolk stung more than their earlier amusement. A shadow fell over her. Clara flinched, expecting another curious stare or whispered comment. Instead, she saw a pair of worn boots planted firmly on the dusty ground. Slowly, she raised her gaze, following the faded denim overalls and the plain, long-sleeve shirt to a face weathered like old leather. His eyes, a surprising shade of hazel, were kind, though tinged with an almost apologetic sadness. He held out a glass of water. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet, almost a murmur. "You look like you could use this." Clara stared at the glass. The water shimmered, catching the harsh sunlight. Suspicion warred with a desperate thirst. She hadn't realized how dry her throat was, how parched her lips felt. Was this another trick? Another way to make her feel more foolish? "Who are you?" she managed, her voice raspy. "Silas Blackwood," he replied, offering a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I farm just outside of town. So you were having a bit of a rough time." He shifted his weight, his gaze flickering to the ground for a moment. Didn't seem right to just stand by. Clara hesitated. Accepting the water felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging the depth of her despair. But the sun continued its relentless assault, and her body screamed for relief. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. His hand was calloused, rough from hard work, but his touch was gentle. She took the glass and drank deeply, the cool water soothing her parched throat. She finished it in one long gulp, the relief immediate and profound. "Thank you," she whispered, handing the empty glass back to him. Silas nodded, accepting the glass without a word. He looked around, seemingly uncomfortable with the attention they were drawing, even though most of the townsfolk were now going about their business. He gestured vaguely towards the north. "My farm's not far," he said. "Got a spare room. A bit plain, but it's dry and cool. You're welcome to rest there for a while, if you've nowhere else to go. No charge, of course." He added the last part quickly, as if afraid she might misunderstand his intentions. Clara looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. She saw only genuine concern, a quiet empathy that seemed to radiate from him. She knew nothing about him, but something in his demeanor, in the sincerity of his hazel eyes, made her trust him. Or perhaps she simply had no other choice. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I don't have any money to pay you." Silas shrugged. "Don't need any. Just figured a body shouldn't be left like this." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Besides, Mama always said helping folks in need was the right thing to do." From across the street, near the blacksmith shop, Eli watched the exchange. The rhythmic clang of his hammer against the hot iron had ceased. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his brow furrowed in thought. He didn't smile or wave, but as Silas turned to lead Clara away from the platform, Eli gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of Silas's actions. Clara looked back at the town, at the curious faces that had watched her humiliation. She saw Martha Higgins standing near the general store, her expression unreadable. Then, she turned and followed Silas, her valise feeling heavier than ever in her hand, a symbol of her shattered hopes and uncertain future. The road to Silas's farm stretched before them, a dusty ribbon leading into the unknown. Life on the farm. The wagon lurched and swayed along the rutted track, each bump a reminder of Clara's jarring change of fortune. Silas, his weathered hands firm on the reins, remained a man of few words, but his steady gaze offered a quiet reassurance. The landscape unfolded around them, a tapestry of rolling hills patched with fields of gold and green, a stark contrast to the dust and disappointment of Redemption Gulch. The farm itself was a humble affair, a simple wooden house with a wide porch, a barn leaning slightly to one side, and a generous vegetable garden stretching out back. Chickens pecked busily in a fenced enclosure, their cheerful clucking a welcome sound. Silas showed her to a small, clean room at the back of the house. "It ain't fancy," he said, his voice rough but kind, "but it's dry and warm. You can stay as long as you need." Clara, overwhelmed by his generosity, could only manage a choked, "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Silas," he corrected gently. "Just Silas." The next morning, Clara was determined to earn her keep. Silas was already up and about, tending to the animals. She found him in the chicken coop, scattering feed. "Mornin'," he greeted, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good morning," Clara replied, venturing into the coop. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Silas pointed to a collection of woven baskets. "Collect the eggs. Careful now, some of the hens get a bit opinionated." Clara chuckled, a sound that felt foreign to her own ears. The chickens, indeed, had opinions. One particularly plump hen squawked indignantly as Clara reached for an egg beneath her. Clara, however, persevered, her fingers gently coaxing the eggs from their nests. The warmth of the eggs in her hands was grounding, a tangible connection to the life around her. Later that day, Silas led her to the garden, a riot of green shoots and budding blossoms. "We need to get these tomatoes planted," he explained, handing her a trowel. "Ground's been turned, just need to make the holes and tuck him in." Clara knelt beside him, her hands sinking into the rich, dark soil. The scent of earth and growing things filled her nostrils, a welcome change from the stale air of the train and the perfumed artifice of her former life. As she carefully placed each tomato seedling into its new home, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. It was honest work, demanding and rewarding in equal measure. Silas worked alongside her, his movements economical and precise. He showed her how to space the plants, how to mound the soil around their stems, how to water them gently. Their shared labor created a comfortable silence between them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. The house, however, felt empty. Silas cooked simple, utilitarian meals, beans, potatoes, the occasional piece of salted pork. The food was nourishing but lacked soul. Clara, remembering the joy she found in baking back home, asked if she could try her hand at cooking. Silas looked surprised, but readily agreed. "Help yourself to whatever's there." That afternoon, Clara explored the contents of Silas's pantry. Flour, yeast, a jar of molasses, some dried apples. Inspiration struck. She decided to bake bread. She mixed the ingredients in a large earthenware bowl, her hands kneading the dough with practiced ease. The rhythmic motion was soothing, a meditative act that calmed her restless spirit. As the dough rose, filling the kitchen with its yeasty aroma, Clara felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of contentment she hadn't anticipated. Silas returned from the fields as the bread was baking, his face etched with weariness. He paused in the doorway, his eyes widening slightly as he inhaled the fragrant air. "What's that smell?" he asked, his voice softer than Clara had ever heard it. "Bread," Clara replied, smiling. "I thought I'd make some for supper." Silas watched her as she pulled the loaf from the oven, its crust a deep golden brown. He took a tentative bite, his eyes closing in appreciation. "This," he declared, "is the best thing I've tasted in years." That evening, as they sat at the simple wooden table, sharing the freshly baked bread with a stew Clara had prepared, a new kind of intimacy settled between them. Silas, usually taciturn, began to talk about his farm, about the challenges of the weather, the satisfaction of a good harvest, the loneliness of the long winter nights. Clara listened intently, offering words of encouragement and support. She discovered that Silas was not just a farmer, but a man of quiet dignity and hidden depths. His calloused hands were strong and capable, but his eyes held a flicker of vulnerability. He was a man who had known hardship, but who had never lost his faith in the land. As the days turned into weeks, Clara found herself falling into a comfortable routine. She tended to the chickens, helped in the garden, and filled the house with the aromas of her baking. She and Silas worked side by side, their shared labor forging a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. She even began to anticipate his rare smiles, the crinkling around his eyes that spoke volumes. Redemption Gulch, and the humiliation she suffered there, began to fade into a distant memory, replaced by the simple joys of life on the farm and the quiet companionship of a man who had offered her a second chance. A question remained, a small knot of anxiety in her stomach. How long would this last? And what did the future hold for Clara Sweetwater, the mail-order bride who never was? The return of Hank. The sinking sun painted Redemption Gulch in long shadows as Hank Buchanan lurched into view. He wobbled between storefronts, his attire disheveled, a florid flush mottling his cheeks. An amber-tinged bottle of whiskey served as his unsteady crutch, its contents swirling with each clumsy stride. "Clara," he bellowed, his voice gravelly from drink. "Clara, where in tarnation are you?" The sound carried, echoing in the stillness of the main thoroughfare. A few locals paused, their conversations hushed as they observed Hank's advance with mingled curiosity and disdain. Oblivious, he pressed on, fixated on locating his runaway bride. He discovered her outside the general store, deep in conversation with Mrs. Gunderson about flower prices. Clara's back was turned, but the brilliant azure of her gown was unmistakable. He stumbled toward her, narrowly avoiding a slumbering hound. "Clara!" he roared, seizing her arm. She gasped, spinning around, her eyes widening, then narrowing with a frigid ire. "Hank," she stated, her tone a dangerous murmur. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Hank swayed, reeking of spirits. A slack, unnerving grin spread across his face. "Clara, sweetheart," he drawled, "I'm so sorry. It completely slipped my mind. Things took a complicated turn in Copper Creek. But here I am now, ready to say our vows." Clara regarded him with a blend of disbelief and utter contempt. "Slip your mind?" she echoed, her voice rising in pitch. "You abandoned me at the depot, Hank. Stranded me with nothing." He chuckled, a mirthless expulsion of air. Now, no need to get your bonnet in a twist. It was just a minor diversion. But I'm here presently, and we can get hitched, just as we planned." He reached to caress her cheek, but she flinched away. "Don't touch me," she spat. "Our plans evaporated the moment you left me at that depot." Hank's smile wavered. "Now, Clara," he whined, his voice taking on a peevish edge. "We made a bargain. You promised to be my wife. You traveled halfway across the country." He gestured clumsily with the bottle. "You owe me that much." A blaze ignited in Clara's eyes. "Owe you? I owe you precisely nothing. You deserted me, Hank. You revealed your true colors. I wouldn't consent to marry you if you were the last man breathing." Hank's features hardened. The veneer of inebriated charm dissolved, unveiling a raw, repellent anger. "So you think you're too good for me now, eh? Living it up on Silas's farm. Probably think you can snag yourself a better catch, don't you?" He spat on the dusty ground. Rose Abernathy, clutching her two youngest children, observed the altercation from across the street. Her face was etched with worry, and her eyes held a somber familiarity. She recalled a time when she too had anticipated a brighter future, a life of ease and security, only to have it stolen by a man's recklessness and duplicity. She tightened her grip on her children's hands, maternal protectiveness surging within her. "Come on, Clara," Hank pressed, gripping her arm tighter. "Let's go. We're tying the knot. Right now." Clara struggled against his hold. "Release me, Hank," she exclaimed. "Don't cause a scene, Clara," he hissed, tugging her closer. "Just cooperate. Be the dutiful wife you pledged to be." Rose could bear it no longer. The memory of her past powerlessness stirred within her. She stepped forward, her voice surprisingly resolute. "Leave her be, Hank," she stated. Hank pivoted, his eyes glinting with malice. "But out of this, Rose. It's none of your affair." "It becomes my affair when I witness a woman being accosted," Rose retorted, her voice unwavering. "Release her, Hank. She has no desire to accompany you." Hank glared at Rose, then back at Clara, his face contorted with frustration and fury. He recognized he was outnumbered, outmaneuvered. He cursed under his breath, releasing Clara's arm with a violent shove. "Fine," he spat, "but don't come crawling back when you comprehend the magnitude of your error. You'll regret this, Clara. You'll all regret this." He took another gulp of whiskey and stumbled away, muttering unintelligibly. Clara stood motionless, trembling, her gaze riveted on Hank's retreating form. The humiliation and ire surged within her, threatening to consume her. Rose approached her cautiously, her expression etched with concern. "Are you all right, Clara?" she inquired softly. Clara nodded slowly, inhaling deeply. "Yes," she replied, her voice shaky. "I will be." But as she met Rose's kind, careworn gaze, she understood that the encounter with Hank had irrevocably altered her. The remnants of her former aspirations, the dream she had carried from Boston, had finally been shattered. Now, she had to determine what she would construct in their place. And she had to do it here in Redemption Gulch. Standing up, Hank Buchanan punctuated the dirt with a gob of spit, the gesture a clumsy insult aimed in Clara's general direction. "You'll regret this, Clara. Crawl back you will, when you find out no other man would look at you twice." He teetered, a miasma of cheap whiskey radiating from him. Silas Blackwood, usually a shadow at the periphery of any gathering, his height making him almost invisible until he chose otherwise, moved forward. Each step was measured, a deliberate counterpoint to Hank's drunken rant. The dying sun caught the silver on his belt buckle, turning it to fleeting fire. "She said no, Hank," Silas rumbled, his voice surprisingly resonant yet conversational, cutting through the tense quiet. It wasn't a yell, but carried the heft of unshakable conviction, momentarily dulling Hank's bravado. Hank peered, struggling to focus. "Blackwood, but out. This is between me and her." Silas remained planted, his gaze steady as a mountain. "It becomes everyone's concern when you behave this way. She's entitled to her choices, same as you or me." A fragile warmth bloomed in Clara's chest. Silas, the quiet farmer, defending her. A ripple went through the small crowd that had gathered like weeds after a rain. Martha Higgins, arms clamped across her generous figure, shifted her weight, her expression conflicted. She'd witnessed her fair share of heartache in Redemption Gulch, but the unguarded vulnerability in Clara's eyes, juxtaposed with Hank's loudishness, ignited a protective spark. "He abandoned her at the depot," Martha declared, her voice pitched to carry. "Left her penniless and stranded." Hank spun on Martha, his features twisting. "Stick to your own business, Martha. Always the town gossip." But Martha stood firm. "And you've always been a brute, Hank Buchanan." Someone needed to say it. The murmur intensified, a rising tide of censure aimed squarely at Hank. Clara watched, surprised by this unexpected support. These neighbors, strangers only days before, were rallying to her cause. Silas maintained his unwavering gaze on Hank, his expression unyielding. "Leave her be, Hank. Go home and sleep it off." Hank, sensing the change in the wind, seemed to shrink. The fight evaporated, leaving behind only sullen resentment. He muttered a string of curses under his breath, then pivoted and lurched toward the saloon, his shoulders slumping. The crowd watched him retreat, a shared exhalation of relief rippling through them. The taut air loosened, replaced by a tentative sense of unity. Silas turned to Clara, his face gentling. "Are you all right, Miss Sweetwater?" A watery smile touched Clara's lips, overflowing with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I don't know what to say." "No need for words," Silas said, his gaze encompassing the small assembly. "Just take things one day at a time." Martha Higgins stepped forward, her face creased with concern. "Come along, dear. Let's get you inside. A cup of tea and a good sit-down are what you need." She draped a comforting arm around Clara's shoulders, steering her towards the general store. As they walked, Clara glanced back at Silas, who remained in the street, watching over them. He offered a slight, almost invisible nod, a silent promise of support. Inside the general store, Martha bustled, preparing tea and offering Clara a thick slice of apple pie. The familiar comfort of cinnamon and baked apples filled the small space, a balm to the raw edges of recent days. "Don't you fret, dear," Martha soothed. "Redemption Gulch might be small, but we look after our own." Clara sipped the tea, its warmth seeping into her. She surveyed the general store, the shelves laden with necessities, the faces of the townsfolk, etched with concern and support. It wasn't the gilded future she had envisioned, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be a life after all, one built not on shimmering illusions, but on the tangible reality of the present, surrounded by people who, despite their initial reserve, were extending a hand. This was just the beginning. Choosing her own destiny, Clara leaned into Martha's plump shoulder, the woman's hand a steadying presence on her back. The scent of lavender and wood smoke clung to Martha's apron, a comforting aroma in the unsettling atmosphere. She kept her gaze locked on the worn planks of the boardwalk, unable to meet Hank's furious glare. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Hank," she finally managed, her voice a trembling thread in the sudden hush. His face, already flushed from the whiskey, darkened further. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. You're my wife. You belong with me." He took a step towards her, his boots thudding heavily on the wooden planks. Silas shifted, his presence a quiet bulwark behind Clara. He didn't speak, but the steel in his eyes was a clear warning. "I'm not your wife, Hank. You made that quite clear when you disappeared. I don't belong to anyone but myself." The words felt foreign on her tongue, yet they resonated with a newfound strength. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a flicker of defiance. Hank's jaw clenched. "You ungrateful little—" He spat the words out like venom. "After all I did for you, bringing you all the way out here, brought me out here and abandoned me," Rose Abernathy interjected, her voice sharp. She stepped forward, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You left her high and dry, Hank Buchanan. You don't get to waltz back in here and claim her now." "Stay out of this, Rose," Hank growled, his attention momentarily diverted. He reached for Clara, his fingers closing around her arm with surprising force. "Come on, Clara. I'm taking you home." A gasp rippled through the small crowd. Clara cried out, a strangled sound of fear and protest. Silas moved with a speed that belied his size, his hand clamping down on Hank's wrist like a vice. "Let her go, Hank." Silas's voice was low and dangerous, the kind of quiet that promised a storm. Hank tugged, trying to wrench his arm free. "Get your hands off me, Blackwood. This is between me and my wife." "She's not your wife," Silas repeated, his grip tightening. "And she doesn't want to go with you." The air crackled with tension. Hank, fueled by whiskey and wounded pride, shoved Silas, sending him stumbling back a step. The crowd surged forward, a wave of concerned faces and murmuring voices. "Leave her alone, Hank," someone shouted. "Get out of town," another voice chimed in. Hank, momentarily stunned by the unexpected resistance, regained his footing. He glared at the crowd, his eyes narrowed and bloodshot. "You all stay out of this. This is family business." He lunged for Clara again, his intentions clear. This time, Rose was ready. She shoved him hard, catching him off balance. He stumbled backwards, crashing into a stack of crates outside the general store, sending apples scattering across the boardwalk. The scene erupted into chaos. People surged forward, pushing and shoving, trying to keep Hank away from Clara. Martha pulled Clara behind her, shielding her from the fray. Silas, recovered from the shove, stood protectively in front of them, his eyes scanning the crowd, assessing the situation. Hank, bruised and enraged, scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with fury. He roared, a sound of pure animal rage. "I'll be back," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. "You haven't seen the last of me." Then, defeated and humiliated, he turned and staggered towards the saloon, disappearing into the dimly lit interior. The crowd slowly dispersed, the murmurs of concern gradually fading into the background. Clara stood trembling, leaning heavily on Martha for support. The scent of bruised apples hung heavy in the air, a lingering reminder of the chaotic scene. Silas remained by her side, his presence a silent reassurance. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Thank you, Silas," she whispered. He simply nodded, his gaze still fixed on the saloon, a silent promise to protect her. The events of the past few minutes had solidified something within her. Hank was a ghost of a past she was ready to leave behind. Her future, uncertain as it was here, in Redemption Gulch, with the people who had shown her unexpected kindness and the quiet, watchful man who stood beside her. This was her home, and she would defend it. She would choose her own destiny, no matter the cost. Redemption for Redemption Gulch. Martha's grip tightened around Clara's shoulders as they watched Hank lurch toward the saloon, his defeated posture radiating a pathetic weakness instead of menace. The townsfolk's jeers still stung the dust-laden air, a chorus of moral outrage that had routed him from Clara's doorstep. Even Rose Abernathy, displaying unexpected mettle, had brandished a broom like a lance, threatening to sweep him from Redemption Gulch altogether. "He'll be back," Clara breathed, a glacial dread clutching her insides. Silas, a silent sentinel at their side, simply shook his head. "Not this time, Clara. They won't permit it." He indicated the knot of townsfolk, still simmering with resentment. Even at this distance, Clara discerned the steely resolve etched on their faces. He was right. As Hank reached the saloon's shadowed porch, several men peeled away from the crowd and followed him into the dim interior. The batwing doors slapped shut, briefly obscuring the scene within. A low growl of voices ensued, broken by Hank's sharp, enraged bellow. Then nothing. After what felt like an eternity, the men reappeared, their expressions grave. They conferred briefly with the remaining townsfolk, then melted away, their purpose fulfilled. Whatever transpired inside, it worked. The next morning, Hank Buchanan had vanished. His stall in the livery stood empty, his few possessions gone from his rented room above the mercantile. Redemption Gulch had, in essence, cleansed itself. A wave of relief, so profound it nearly stole Clara's strength, cascaded over her. She'd been shackled by fear and uncertainty, convinced her life would forever be dictated by Hank's presence, that she hadn't dared envision a brighter horizon. Now, standing on Silas's porch, the morning sun a balm on her skin, she allowed herself a sliver of hope. The following days unfolded in a flurry of activity. Silas, infused with newfound vigor, dedicated himself to resurrecting the neglected farm. He mended fences, patched the barn's dilapidated roof, and coaxed life back into the fallow fields. Anxious to contribute, Clara worked alongside him. Her hands, once versed in delicate embroidery and refined domesticity, now grew rough and chapped, a testament to her efforts. She found a quiet satisfaction in physical labor, a tangible sense of accomplishment as she transformed overgrown land into something fruitful. Learning to handle a team of horses, her initial trepidation yielded to growing confidence with each passing day. Together, they sowed rows of corn and beans, Clara reveling in the earthy feel of the soil. She even nursed a few forlorn tomato plants back, dreams of Redemption Gulch. The familiar aroma of cinnamon and proofing yeast usually a balm to Clara Sweetwater, wrestled with the butterflies in her belly. She attacked the apple turnover dough, her forceful needing a silent vent for the anxieties churning within. Sunlight spilled through the window, igniting a flurry of dust motes and highlighting the frayed edges of her favorite floral apron. Her gaze drifted to the stack of letters resting beside the flowered workspace, Hank Buchanan's letters. Softened from countless readings, each syllable whispered of possibility. Redemption Gulch, she breathed, the name a foreign melody on her tongue. It conjured vistas of sweeping landscapes, undulating hills, a world liberated from Dust Creek's monotonous grip. Here, the days were a predictable cycle, pre-dawn rising, baking until shadows lengthened, the endless sweeping of flower dust, and the drone of stale gossip. Hank's missives offered a counterpoint. Cattle drives beneath a canopy of stars, a home ringing with the joyous noise of children he yearned to share with her. He sketched a picture of his ranch, a sturdy house boasting a porch swing and a view that swallowed the horizon. He sought a partner. He confessed, someone to weave her life with his and nurture a family. Clara recognized the gamble, a blind leap into the uncertain. Some town gossips deemed her daft, discarding a perfectly good life as if she possessed one for a man she'd never laid eyes on. But desperation, she knew, was a potent current. And beneath the trepidation, a tiny flame of anticipation flickered. At 28, Dust Creek was slowly leaching the life from her. She reached for the most recent letter. The ink blurred where her fingers had gripped it tight during a particularly bleak evening. The wildflowers are riotous this year, Clara. I envision you strolling amongst them, sunlight dancing in your hair. A blush bloomed on her cheeks. Hank's prose was captivating. No one had ever remarked on sunlight dancing in her hair. Here, she was simply Clara, the baker. Plain Clara. Perhaps Redemption Gulch held the key to unlocking something more. With renewed resolve, she finished the dough. The turnovers, burnished gold and shimmering with sugar, were arrayed on the counter to cool, a small offering for Mrs. Gable, her neighbor and ever-watchful guardian. Upstairs, she wrestled open her trunk, its hinges emitting a rusty shriek. Inside, layers of time-worn quilts guarded her modest treasures. A handful of dresses, mostly cast-offs, a well-thumbed Bible, and a petite silver locket cradling her parents' image. Each dress was carefully folded, smoothing out the creases as if preparing for a gala instead of a journey into the unknown. She added her finest bonnet, adorned with silk ribbons, carefully kept for a momentous occasion. This, she reasoned, qualified. The locket felt cool in her hand. Her parents would have wanted her to thrive. They wouldn't want her to stagnate in Dust Creek, eternally baking apple turnovers. A crescendo of hope and anxiety swelled within her. She packed a slender volume of poetry, a secret indulgence hidden from the judgmental eyes of the town busybodies. And nestled in a corner, a pouch of her prized sourdough starter, swaddled in damp linen. Even in Redemption Gulch, people deserved quality bread. A gentle rapping echoed from downstairs. "Clara, dear, are you presentable?" It was Mrs. Gable, her voice a comforting rasp. Clara smoothed her apron and opened the door. The older woman stood on the porch, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by a life fully experienced. She cradled a small, hand-stitched quilt, its colors faded but the stitching meticulous. "Heard you were setting off, dear," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes reflecting a poignant mix of sadness and understanding. "Thought you might need this. Wards off the chill on those long nights." Clara's throat constricted. "Oh, Mrs. Gable, you shouldn't have." "Nonsense. It's been gathering dust in the attic. Besides," she added with a playful glint, "I expect a photograph of you with that handsome rancher, once you've settled in." Clara mustered a watery smile. "I will. And thank you for everything." They stood in contemplative silence, unspoken sentiments hanging in the air. Dust Creek had little fondness for overt displays of emotion. "Be brave, Clara," Mrs. Gable said at last, squeezing her hand, "and don't let anyone define what you're capable of." Clara watched Mrs. Gable retreat towards her house, the quilt held close. Then, she turned back to the bakery, her heart a frantic drum. She turned the lock, the click reverberating in the quiet space. A final, lingering look at the worn surfaces, the flowered floorboards, the familiar embrace of her small bakery. This was the fulcrum, the close of one chapter, the opening of the next. She lifted her suitcase, its heft surprisingly manageable. It bore her aspirations, her reveries, and a small sack of sourdough starter. It held the promise of Redemption Gulch. Drawing a fortifying breath, Clara Sweetwater emerged onto the dusty thoroughfare, poised to confront whatever fate had in store. The stagecoach was scheduled for arrival at dawn. A train ride and a broken promise. The rhythmic clatter of the train against the iron rails was Clara's soporific, a percussive backdrop to the daydreams burgeoning in her mind. Each lurch and mournful cry of the engine pulled her further from Dust Creek's monotonous routine, whisking her toward the sprawling promise of Redemption Gulch. She envisioned Hank, his sun-etched features softening into a welcoming smile, awaiting her arrival. Not a lavish estate, but a solid, welcoming ranch house arose in her thoughts, smelling of seasoned timber and bubbling stew. Children, perhaps not instantly, filled the imagined rooms with joyous clamor. The other passengers were an anonymous collection of faces, a blend of world-weary commuters and dewy-eyed hopefuls, yet Clara remained oblivious. Her vision was consumed by the panorama outside. Undulating hills, brushed with shades of amber and sienna, populated by grazing cattle that blurred into the horizon. This was it, the life she had dared to conjure. As the train decelerated, anticipation coiled tight in Clara's stomach. Redemption Gulch presented itself as a smattering of structures against a majestic wall of snow-dusted peaks. The air, bracing and pure, carried the fragrance of evergreens and moist earth, a far cry from the stale, all too familiar scents of Dust Creek. With a final shudder, the train sighed to a stop, its brakes expelling steam in a serpent-like hiss. Smoothing the creases from her plain calico dress, Clara inhaled deeply, willing her racing heart to calm. This was the moment she'd waited for. Stepping onto the weathered planks of the platform, she scanned the small gathering. Her gaze darted, searching for a beloved face, the kind crinkle of familiar eyes, the determined jawline she had come to adore through letters. But Hank was nowhere in sight. A farmer, his mouth full of chewing tobacco, observed her with unconcealed curiosity. A young mother, her toddler